Hi, everyone. My name is Sam. Thank you for being here today. This is my senior lecture. So 5 years ago, it felt like this day would never come. I started residency way back in 2020, which I think is unanimously agreed upon to be one of the worst years ever of our lifetime. And I totally agree. It was horrible. But for me, 2020 actually started to be one of the worst years of my life before COVID. It started back in January, and I apologize if I get emotional. But it started back in January. For context, 1 to 2 years prior, my mom hadn't been feeling like herself. She was experiencing brain fog, word finding difficulty. She saw her primary care doctor and a psychiatrist, and her symptoms were chalked up to menopause and anxiety, and it checked out given her age. She was like in her mid to late 50s at the time. But she still wasn't feeling like herself, and my siblings, my dad and I could tell as well. Here we are online for Gringotts at Universal Studios in 2019, if you could tell. She saw 2 different neurologists, had brain imaging, she had MRIs, MRAs, none of which were very revealing. In late 2019, one of her neurologists referred for a PET scan. And we received these results in January 2020. And as we know, anytime you have an impression this long, usually it's not a great sign. So I'll highlight what the summary was. FTD's been in the news, especially with some famous people having gotten diagnosed. In medical school, I remember learning about a bunch of terrible diseases, but 3 of them kind of sat with me as I was going through school as like, wow, those are really scary. One being PEs, I'm less scared of those now, even though they are still very scary. One being brain aneurysms, also still very scary, and one of them being frontotemporal dementia. And so for anyone that doesn't remember or wants a little refresher, it's a group of clinically and neuropathologically heterogeneous neurodegenerative disorders, characterized by prominent changes in social behavior and personality or aphasia accompanied by degeneration of the frontal and temporal lobes. A couple different variants. You could have a behavioral variant, an aphasia variant, or a motor syndrome. Diagnosis is primarily clinical, but can have supporting imaging. Treatment is supportive care. There are no current FDA-approved drugs for treatment of FTD, and the prognosis is 2 to 10 years from time of diagnosis. So I was looking down this very dark hole, knowing this was my mom's diagnosis and knowing that I was about to start residency in just a couple short months. And then 2020 continued to be the worst year ever as COVID hit and slammed all the ERs in the US, especially in New York City, especially where I was about to start training. 2020 continued as I celebrated match day in quarantine and took a bunch of unflattering photos, celebrated on FaceTime. Couple weeks later, I got my cap and gown, received my diploma, and took a bunch more unflattering photos. And then in April, I had my graduation. Our in-person celebration was canceled, and instead we had a virtual PowerPoint presentation, which basically involved me getting dressed up in my cap and gown, doing my hair and makeup, and trying to take a photo to submit for the PowerPoint slide that would be my graduation, which was this. I never got to take photos with my family. Felt a little weird, all of us just sitting home in quarantine and everybody getting dressed up, putting makeup on just to take photos. Just wasn't really in my personality or my family to do that. So we celebrated, we watched the PowerPoint, and then we sat around with nowhere to go. But I did get one of my favorite photos of that day, which was this one. This is Loki. And then the year continued. I met my future co-residents during virtual Zoom happy hours, and then started residency a couple weeks later. And most of residency looked like this, especially in the early years. But I made it to the end. I made it ending very symbolically with a CCT shift with Dr. Hassel overnight, and I got my celebratory last photo with a pretty awesome team. And it's been quite a journey the last 5 years, a very defining moment in my life. And I developed a lot of interest during this time. I was gravitated toward a number of things. And for a long time, I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about today. I thought about talking about my mom and her condition and the diagnosis. I thought about maybe talking about my experience with COVID and the waves I saw during my first year of residency. Maybe my experience as chief, maybe women in EM issues, maybe planning recreational things or wellness events, or talking about wellness on a deeper level, or burnout, or maybe sports medicine, or event medicine, or maybe some extracurriculars that I like doing outside of medicine, or getting married during residency, which I don't recommend planning your own wedding during residency. I even debated dedicating an entire lecture to my cats. But nothing felt quite right. I was pretty terrified to start residency between my mom's diagnosis and knowing I was stepping into a 5-year residency, two independently being probably the hardest things I've ever done. So combining them together was pretty tough. And a lot of times during residency, I felt pretty lost. And the truth is, the last 5 years have probably been the loneliest I've ever felt. In my life. A few years into residency, I remember hearing Dr. Stetz, the amazing Dr. Jessica Stetz, say a quote, "We have a loneliness epidemic." And I didn't think much about it at the time until I realized how much I was affected by it. And I realized all these things I had interest in kind of intertwined with loneliness itself and all with each other. And then it just kind of made sense to talk about this concept and how it affects us as residents and in healthcare, and also how it affects people in general. So I'm gonna briefly, there's a lot to go in detail about this, but I'm briefly gonna cover loneliness and the importance of connection and community. Before doing any research. And I didn't think there was gonna be much for me to read. I only had my own experiences to pull from. But when I started looking for resources, I found way more than I thought I would. Just a show of hands, has anyone received a lecture about this or has read in detail or read any studies about it? A little bit. I maybe saw like 3 hands kind of flutter. Well, it turns out there's a US Surgeon General's advisory that's been published on this topic, which I had no idea about until I started working on this lecture. And there are tons and tons of published reports and different studies on this. And I found it pretty mind-blowing. It had me thinking, how could something so personal to me and so widely known and published feel like they'd never overlapped? How did I have no insight into something I was feeling so much that was so specific to me? Until now. So here we are. So I have a couple points I'm going to go over. I'm just scratching the surface of a lot of these things because I also didn't do full critical appraisals of every piece of research. I just kind of pulled some summaries just to kind of give an overview of what's out there about this topic. So just defining social connection. Approximately 50% of adults in the US are reported being lonely in recent years, and this was pre-COVID. But how do we define this loneliness and social connection? So I really like this graphic from the US Surgeon General Advisory, and it kind of broke down social connection into 3 vital components. One of them being structure, the number and variety of relationships and frequency of interactions, which can be your household size, your friend circle size, or your marital or partnership status, the function of these connections, the degree to which the relationships serve various needs, which can be emotional support, mentorship, or support in a crisis, and quality, which is the positive and negative aspects of relationships and interactions, which can be a relationship's satisfaction or strain level, or social inclusion or exclusion. A couple other points on social connection. It's a continuum. Social connection is often seen as dichotomous. as in someone's either lonely or they're not, or they're connected or they're not, but it's way more of a gradient and a gray area. Everyone falls somewhere on this continuum of social connection, with low social connection generally associated with poorer outcomes and higher social connection with better outcomes. It's also very dynamic. The amount and quality of social connection in our lives can change. It changes over time, can be improved or compromised for a multitude of reasons, such as illness, moving, job transitions, and other life events. Changes in community or society can impact social connectedness, and how long we remain on one end of the continuum can influence our overall health. And lastly, isolation is not the same as loneliness. A person may experience loneliness despite not being isolated from others. Key measures of isolation and loneliness can miss whether individuals are reaping the benefits of a good social connection. Just because someone is physically around a lot of people and has interactions with them, it doesn't mean they're experiencing the benefits of a high quality relationship. And I think point number 3 can be an example of how we can feel, especially in early residency. We're surrounded by people. And it's how I felt at the beginning of residency. Meeting hundreds of new people, residents, attendings, people on off service. And while we're not physically alone, we could still feel lonely if we don't develop these high quality connections with others. Second, some statistics on social isolation. While virtual social networks are growing, our true social networks and connections are getting smaller. And this data was outlined in a survey-based study. Objective measures of social exposure were obtained between 2003 and 2020, and the study found that social isolation, which is this top left graph, measured by the average time spent alone, increased from 4 hours and 45 minutes per day in 2003 and went up to 5 hours and 33 minutes in 2020. Social participation across several types of relationships has steadily declined. The amount of time people engage with friends in person decreased from 60 minutes a day to 20 minutes a day between 2003 and 2020. And social interaction also decreased among family members within the same household and among companions. And as you can imagine, the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated these trends in declining socialization. In the same study, some data was extrapolated to look at various subgroups by age, gender, income, race, and work hours. I won't go into detail about all of them, but just a few I wanted to highlight. The decline in social interaction is most pronounced for young people between ages 15 and 24. For this age group, time spent in person with friends reduced by nearly 70% over the 2 decades, from 2.5 hours per day down to 40 minutes per day. Older adults spent more time in isolation, but also relatively more time in companionship. As far as race goes, Black Americans, which is highlighted in red, experienced more social isolation and less social engagement overall relative to other races. In regards to gender, women, seen in red, spent more time with family, while men spent more time with friends and in companionship. And overall, men's social connectedness decline was steeper than it was for women. And now, impact on overall health and well-being. I thought this was a good summarizing quote from one of the articles I read. Extensive scientific findings from a variety of disciplines, including epidemiology, neuroscience, medicine, psychology, and sociology, converge on the same conclusion. Social connection is a significant predictor of longevity and better physical, cognitive, and mental health, while social isolation and loneliness are significant predictors of premature death and poor health. Over 4 decades of research has produced robust evidence that lacking social connection, and in particular scoring high on measures of social isolation, is associated with significantly increased risk for early death from all causes. And again, there was tons of papers out there, and I had to stop myself from going down rabbit holes. But I'll just highlight a couple pieces from a few of these. Loneliness is a risk factor for all-cause mortality for both genders together, as well as for men and women when analyzed separately. Loneliness shows a harmful effect for all-cause mortality, and this effect is slightly stronger in men than in women. In controlled studies, having high levels of perceived social support, larger social network, and being married were associated with decreases in relative risk for mortality in cancer patients. Systematic research demonstrating the link between social connection and mortality risk dates to one of the first large-scale longitudinal epidemiological studies conducted in 1979. This research was found This research found that people who lacked social connection were more than twice as likely to die within the follow-up period than those with greater social connection, even after accounting for age, health status, socioeconomic status, smoking, alcohol use, obesity, physical activity, and utilization of preventative health services. Among both men and women, increasing social isolation was significantly associated with decreased survival times. The effect of social relationships can be benchmarked against other well-established lifestyle risk factors. As shown here, the magnitude of the effect of social connection on mortality risk is comparable and in many cases exceeds that of other risk factors. And this graph is very similar. I just thought it was a better visual that you could see this point being made. In a 2022 statement, the American Heart Association concluded that, quote, social isolation and loneliness are common yet under-recognized determinants of cardiovascular health and brain health. A synthesis of data across 16 independent longitudinal studies shows poor social relationships, defined as social isolation, poor social support, and loneliness, were associated with a 29% increase in the risk of heart disease and a 32% increase in the risk of stroke. I thought this study was quite interesting. It was from 1997. The authors here examined whether social ties to friends, family, work, and community were associated with increased host resistance to infection. Participants reported their various types of social ties and then were given nasal drops containing rhinovirus. And then they were monitored for the development of signs and symptoms. And they found that participants with more social ties were less susceptible to common colds. They produced less mucus. They were more effective in the ciliary clearance of their nasal passages, and they shed less virus. The susceptibility to colds decreased in a dose response manner with the increased diversity of their social network. In regards to dementia, chronic loneliness and social isolation can increase the risk of developing dementia by approximately 50% in older adults, and this is even after controlling for demographics and health status. Regarding cognitive decline, a study that followed older adults over a 12-year period found that cognitive abilities declined 20% faster among those who reported loneliness. And in anxiety and depression, a systematic review of multiple longitudinal studies found that the odds of developing depression in adults is more than double among people who report feeling lonely often compared to those who rarely or never feel lonely. Additionally, in older adults, both social isolation and loneliness have been shown to independently increase likelihood of depression and anxiety. I don't know if you guys remember the blue zones. I think I was maybe in high school when it was kind of coming out, but it was the National Geographic and National Institute on Aging discovered these blue zones, which were 5 demographically confirmed and geographically defined areas with the highest percentage of people living to age 100 or approaching age 100. Research teams looked into these areas to identify lifestyle characteristics that might explain this longevity. They found that the lifestyle of all Blue Zone residents shared 9 specific characteristics that they called the Power 9. And 3 of these pillars involved social connection and belonging. It wasn't just their activity level or the food and foods they were consuming. Next, loneliness during residency training. And I'm just going to kind of, again, pull out some summaries from some of the articles I read. Burnout was associated with loneliness in a dose-dependent fashion. Greater sense of personal accomplishment was associated with greater network centrality. Loneliness increased the risk of major depression, major anxiety, and suicide ideation. This one was among medical residents during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in this study, with over 2,000 respondents, about 18% endorsed intense loneliness, which was defined as a lot or most of the time. About 21% in medical students, almost a quarter of residents and fellows, and about 9.5% of faculty physicians. And within that study, a greater odds of endorsing intense loneliness was seen in people under age 40, women, non-white race, those with burnout, depression, and suicide ideation. So some strategies to improve. When I started residency in 2020, between COVID isolation and my mom's diagnosis, I felt extremely lonely and I was craving social interaction. There were no scheduled wellness events due to COVID. Most journal clubs and any kind of event was all on Zoom. I'm pretty sure 100% of our conferences were on Zoom then too. I often missed out on smaller gatherings, like impromptu gatherings, because I often went home to visit my family and assist my mom to doctor's appointments. And it's why I became so involved in wellness. Strengthening social connection and community is not easy. I could say from personal experience, having been heavily involved in residency wellness and reflective practice rounds. Fostering great connection requires widespread individual and institutional action. It demands a sustained investment, effort, and focus, and it can't come from just a few people. The social infrastructure of a community shapes the resources to which individuals and groups have access to their social networks. The US Surgeon General Advisory article mentions various ways this can be done in a community through programs, policies, and physical elements. I took those ideas and with a little help from ChatGPT and inspiration from Buckley telling me to use ChatGPT for today, I came up with these 7 pillars for social infrastructure for EM residency. And I'll briefly go through them. So peer support and connection, mentorship programs, pairing senior residents with juniors, faculty mentorship pairings based on career interests to balance both academic and emotional support. And you can consider multiple pairings. For example, like a female resident might have an academic interest with a male attending, but that person would not be able to talk to them about being a woman in EM or the battles that you can have regarding like having kids or growing a family. So multiple pairings can be utilized. Peer check-ins, having quarterly peer support groups, maybe wellness captains designated in each class year to advocate, attend wellness meetings, and check in regularly. Wellness-focused social events. So we do okay on this. Scheduled wellness days that we have protected time for, retreats, ones that are resident only and faculty inclusive, maybe designated half days for various events. Having recurring scheduled monthly social events with rotating hosts, rotating themes. Post-clinic happy hour used to be something that happened every Wednesday at 5 o'clock without fail. But I think with COVID, a lot of these things kind of dropped off. And then family inclusive events, people with kids or spouses that can come with their family so they don't always feel like they have to leave their family to be more involved with residency events. Physical and mental health resources. So mental health access, connection with a therapist or counselor that's familiar with the EM lifestyle, or an anonymous hotline or walk-in hours, fitness resources, whether it's gym access or a stipend for a fitness membership, or organizing group workouts. Running club, yoga, cycling, not everything has to cost money, and there are other ways that we can look into these different resources together. And then having like a comfortable space, so a designated lounge, comfortable area where we can rest or sleep during or after shifts. Culture of recognition and appreciation. So shout outs, gratitude boards can be in common areas that people are in person or a digital platform, something like a resident of the month based on peer faculty nominations. And this last one, I was gonna not include because I thought it was super, super cheesy, but then I thought of Dr. D'Souza. So this one's for him. Caught Being Awesome cards that you can give to other people in recognition for kind or helpful actions. Communication and feedback loops. So wellness committees that are resident-led with faculty liaisons, meeting monthly to plan wellness events and troubleshoot burnout. Anonymous feedback where people can report burnout or various interests they have in wellness events for program improvements, scheduling issues, or interpersonal conflicts. Flexibility and autonomy support. So developing like schedule swap systems, personal day banks where you can use extra days separate from your vacation, and also flexibility for professional development. And lastly, onboarding and transition support. I think this is one of the things we do the best, having an intern boot camp where you get social integration and team building, and also a transition out of residency support, career planning, job negotiations. I guess these are 2 things I think we do an excellent job on. And so, like I said, some of these things probably sounded familiar. Some things we already have in place. Some are very strong and well established. Some exist but need a little bit of work. And some are new that we could consider implementing. Back when I was a PGY3 getting more involved in wellness, I used to put out a wellness newsletter. So some of you probably may remember this. I had a lot of fun doing this, and not to toot my own horn, but I thought it was awesome. But it was just a lot of work and I couldn't keep up with it. So I did it every month of I think it was my PGY3 year. And then as I got more busy and had more interest, it was unfortunately something I couldn't keep up with. So that makes me, I think about this concept, and I thank Eva for bringing this to my attention not too long ago, but maybe we could implement a wellness chief, somebody that can be the leader and organize and spearhead a lot of these ideas and initiatives. Apparently, it's something that other residencies have implemented. So with that, I'll also invite you guys to our next committee, and probably the only one we've had in the last year and a half. If anything I've said sounds interesting to you, you can join me, Rabani, and Natasha on Monday, April 21st. I'm happy I've seen other residents kind of get involved with some residency wellness things like Eva, Katie, and Alex. They've been taking some initiatives. But if you want to meet with us and maybe develop a more structured wellness program for our residency, come join us on Monday. And if you can't make it, just shoot me an email and I'll be able to share all the resources with you. Briefly, I didn't get to talk about like how this lecture, as you could see, focused on social connection through the lens of residents and healthcare workers. I didn't have time to focus part of the lecture, even though I wanted to, focus the lecture on facing this as a provider caring for patients, because you could see there are so many health implications, especially in the elderly population and nursing home residents. So if you want resources for that, reach out to me and I could share some of the things I came across with you. And I'll leave you with this last quote, and I already got choked up earlier in this presentation, so like bear with me as I try to read it, because it just hits home a little bit for me. Such a world where we recognize that relationships are just as essential to our well-being as the air we breathe and the food we eat is a world where everyone is healthier physically and mentally. It's a world where we respect and value one another, where we look out for one another, where we create opportunities to uplift one another. A world where our highs are higher because we celebrate them together. Where our lows are more manageable because we respond to them together. And where our recovery is faster because we grieve and rebuild together. These are all my references. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for those of you that joined on Zoom. And then just a couple of thank yous to close out. First, to my co-chiefs and program leadership, emergency leadership. I was surprised at how many photos I had with everyone here. I thought I had no photos, but I had almost everybody. And also shout outs to Dr. Nympha Mehta, Dr. Scott Kendall, Dr. Regan, who were part of leadership earlier in my residency. To the EMIM classes I've overlapped with, 9 years worth of EMIM and beyond, and the faculty. I've looked up to each and every one of you, regardless of which class you were from, especially all my prior chiefs who paved the way for me, and who I'm pretty sure I've cried to multiple times for each of them, so thank you. To all of you guys, the residents and faculty that let me confide personal things with them, let me ask personal questions about your experiences and how you've navigated hard times. To the downstate wellness and counseling, specifically Zoe Nelson, who's one of the counselors I connected with, who's been extremely helpful and kind, and it's helped me through a lot during these hard times I faced. And to my family. And my cats. And last but not least, my husband. The only reason I've ever been able to come to work looking seemingly put together is because he's on the other side taking care of me when I'm falling apart. So thank you. Here's my contact info, and I hope you all keep in touch. Thank you.